Hello and welcome in to the Nate State Show, August 6, 2026 here as we get ready for the college football season. And right now we got a lot of interesting topics to get into today. Going to start with some Heisman ladder, going to move on and discuss the coaches poll, and then we're going to finish it off with some Big Ten versus SEC talk. Should be a fun show, exciting show, somewhat important show, some big heavy-hitting stuff to get into specifically as we get later into the show. But let's start off with a little fun exercise here. The Heisman ladder. We're going to go bottom to top here, so 10 to 9. I got 12 players who I think could have an outside shot at winning the Heisman. And we're going to discuss, or an inside shot, I guess. And we're going to discuss who I think has the top chances. So, here we go. Our 10th player is going to be Julian Sayin. Now, Julian Sayin finished 4th last year. That was pretty good, but he played a really weak schedule. The reason he's on here at all is because Ohio State's schedule is really, really tough, and if he leads them properly through that schedule, then they're going to be doing absolutely amazing this year, and he's going to be flying high as a Heisman favorite on a top team. That can be pretty simple. However, Heisman is a tricky thing to win when you're a player with the stature and strength of Sayin. Now, Sayin is not your gunslinger type quarterback. He's more of a Brock Purdy. Very accurate, good decision maker. That's going to be very tough against a schedule such as Ohio State. I'm not that high on Sayin winning the Heisman. In fact, I'm higher on his counterpart wide receiver, Jeremiah Smith. We'll discuss his place later into the show. And now, second up, we got Malachi Toney. Malachi Toney from the University of Miami. Now, Miami is set up pretty well. We'll discuss their quarterback later. But Toney has some game-changing speed. Typically with receivers, we do see a little bit of a sophomore dip, which is why Toney's not higher. But he was pretty much the best player on the field in the college football playoff. As he scored, I believe, against Indiana and Ohio State and Texas A&M and Ole Miss. Like, he really, really led Miami to most of their big plays, unless it was Fletcher there for Miami. It was Toney and it was Fletcher, and that's how they got most of their big plays. That's how they got a lot of their scoring opportunities. Toney and Fletcher scored a lot of those touchdowns for Miami, and they were two reasons why Miami was what they were last year, a runner-up in the national scene. This year, Miami could be even better. I got to include Malachi Toney in this list. And now, I will say, this is something we'll be updating throughout the season. Probably just a top 5, but got to give him a top 10, top 12 here to start the season at very least. Now, at number 8, I have a man who's higher up on pretty much every list you're going to see, but I have him a little bit lower for one reason. C.J. Carr. Now, C.J. Carr is an absolute baller. I project him to have a fantastic year, don't get me wrong. The issue is, where's his Heisman push going to come from? Notre Dame only has 3 games that I would say are probably losable for a team which, obviously upsets happen. But Notre Dame, as far as a talent perspective go, they really only have 3 games they can outright drop without it being considered a college football landscape shaping or reshaping upset. That is the SMU game, the Miami game, and the game at BYU. I believe 2 of those are at home. And so C.J. Carr just doesn't have the schedule to really go out and lose. And honestly, without the danger of losing, there's not this massive upside. And without the massive upside, there's not going to be too much upside for a Heisman. And that is a major issue as far as C.J. Carr's Heisman status goes, because he's got to have an ability to have a Heisman moment. Indiana lucked out last year for Fernando Mendoza. They also didn't play the strongest schedule, but they happened to catch Penn State at the right time. Penn State was back on the rise up after a pretty disastrous midseason stretch. Everybody considered that a very tough test indeed, and it helped Mendoza win the Heisman because of that Heisman moment on that third down play and the throw to Omar Cooper in the back of the end zone where he made an incredible catch. Mendoza's throw, Cooper's catch. That was kind of the Heisman moment. Where is that going to come for C.J. Carr? You don't have a lot of opportunities to do that. Notre Dame, also a little bit more of a running team. So C.J. Carr is going to be a lot higher up, even 1 on some lists, but he's 8 for me. 7, Jeremiah Smith. Now, Jeremiah Smith, the reason he's not higher is because he's not a quarterback. I feel like that's going to be a large issue for a lot of voters who seem to really only pick quarterbacks. And because they only pick quarterbacks, that's just about what they're going to choose. And there is a lot of good quarterbacks this year, which is going to make it only tougher on the receivers. Jeremiah Smith's a great player. Ohio State's a great program. But I can only put him as high as 7, personally. Just because I don't think they're going to have the ability to truly take that next step and win the Heisman. Even if they have a great season, it's a tough call to have a receiver win the Heisman, even over his own quarterback. And I know Devontae Smith did it. That was one of the best offensive, if not the best offense of all time in college football. All right, 6th spot. That's going to go to John Mateer of Oklahoma. John Mateer I had as my favorite last year. Obviously, that wasn't seen because this is my first year doing this, but he was my favorite last year, and it was looking pretty good, and then he got hurt. And that's obviously a concern for this year, too. But I feel like he's being undervalued in the markets this year. This is still the same guy who absolutely balled out at Washington State. We just watched the last half of last year with him, and we didn't think he was any good. But the reason we didn't think he was any good is because he had a finger injury. So if he can stay healthy, then, well, I think Oklahoma has a fighting chance at being the same team they were last year, if not better. And Mateer has a shot at winning the Heisman, especially if he runs through a tough SEC schedule. Into the top 5 we go. And now this is a guy who, honestly, I don't think most people have this high, but I just saw Curtis Rourke roll in there 2 years ago from Ohio and do great things on a torn ACL. Last year I watched Mendoza, who was pretty all right at Cal, roll in there and win the Heisman. So why isn't Hoover, who's better than those two were in college up to this point, higher on most Heisman boards? And that's an answer I just haven't figured out, especially because I think Indiana is going to go this entire season undefeated. Now, we're going to get more into rankings and predictions August 27th. We're going to have a huge, big preview show. It's going to be massive. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we'll discuss Indiana more then. But for now, I think Indiana is being undervalued as a team, and I think that starts with Josh Hoover, their quarterback. And honestly, Hoover is going to be a guy who's going to be able to use his legs, his arm. He is an NFL talent. To me, that is almost unquestioned. He's going to be a first-rounder by the time we're all said and done here at the end of this year. So, Hoover and the Hoosiers are set up for success. He is top 5 in the Heisman. And now, before we get into our top 4, the 2 people I'm leaving out here is Jaden Maiava for USC and Sam Levitt for LSU. I have 2 problems, 1 for each of them. Maiava, really good player, absolutely worth the top 10. I don't think USC is going to win enough games for him to win the Heisman. And I know that was not particularly an issue for Jaden Daniels and LSU. I think it will be an issue for USC. I don't think USC makes the playoff. And I think that's going to be a real turnoff to most voters. I think, especially in an expanded 12-team playoff, your Heisman winner has to at least make the playoff to win the Heisman. And I think that's what we're going to see there with Maiava. USC is not going to make the playoff. He's going to have a great year. Not going to be a Heisman contender when it's all said and done. Levitt is set up in a good situation at LSU. The issue I have with them is I just don't think Levitt's good enough to win the Heisman. Levitt was good at Arizona State, but he was mostly good because he had Jordan Tyson and Cam Scatterbo. I didn't ever watch Levitt and say, ooh, boy, that guy is an absolute throw artist. That guy can put the ball in any place on the field at any time. I think Levitt's really good. He's almost a Peach Bowl winning quarterback, very, very close to beating Texas. But I just don't think it's going to be there for LSU, and I certainly don't think it's going to be there for Sam Levitt as a Heisman contender. I have him on the list right now just because LSU is projected to be a good team. I will probably not be putting him in my top 5, I don't think, ever in this season. Number 4, that would be Darian Mensah out of Miami. Miami's going to be a good team this year. They're also in the ACC. That means fewer opportunities for big games. Now, he's going to have to ball out against Notre Dame for a chance. He's going to have to put up great numbers every single week. And he's going to have to make the Hurricanes win an ACC title if he wants to be the Heisman winner. Now, if he's able to do those things, Mensah's going to be in the conversation. If he falls short, no. So, Mensah is a really great player, a really good field leader, and he can use his legs. That's why he's here. He should be a first-round talent. Mensah's going to have to stay healthy, and he's going to have to lead the Hurricanes to an awful lot of success if he wants to win the Heisman. I think Miami is capable of that, which is why I have him in the 4 slot. Number 3, Trinidad Chambliss. Trinidad Chambliss is a great quarterback. He wasn't even starting at the beginning of last year, though. He came the D2 route from Ferris State, won championships there. He is an ultimate underdog, a great baller. Sued the NCAA so he could have one more year with Pete Golding at Ole Miss. He wants this more than anyone, and he has the ability to go out and get it. The issue is Ole Miss has probably not the greatest roster around him to do it, but he is that good. So if he leads Ole Miss to somewhere near the top, this guy will probably be the Heisman if he plays at the standard he had at the end of last season. But if they don't, that's obviously the concern for Chambliss and why he's not higher on my list. Number 2, this guy is helped out for 2 reasons. First of all, he has a great supporting cast. Hollywood Smothers, Cam Coleman. It's just a fantastic Sarkisian is his coach, like a fantastic roster at Texas. He has plenty of opportunity to play in big games. His main issue is we haven't seen him fully click yet. End of last year, he was really good, really close. But if he makes that final last little step, Arch will be right there. Arch Manning, fantastic player, absolutely, in my opinion. A lot of people don't agree with that. A lot of people say it's just completely nepotism. But I don't think so. I watched him at the end of last year, and I thought, that's top 5 college quarterback. And I think he can really, truly prove it this year with a final huge step in that senior season. I think he can be that guy for Texas, and he can definitely lead them to a national championship. If he gets into that area, the name on the back of the nameplate is going to certainly help his case. And I could see a Manning winning the Heisman. All right. Then, last up, our Heisman favorite is Dante Moore. Dante Moore at Oregon. Oregon has plenty of opportunity for big games. They play versus Ohio State, versus USC, versus Washington, versus Penn State. This is a really talented... Actually, they don't play at Penn State. Ignore what I said there. This is a really talented squad, but Moore is the driver, and Moore will have the opportunity to go out there and win. Oregon's also a QB factory. They have a decent, as I mentioned earlier, they have a decently difficult schedule. They always seem to put up massive numbers. They play at Oklahoma State. That'll be a chance to prove it early. So absolutely think Dante Moore and honestly the entire program at Oregon can be that driver, just get into the Heisman front seat early and just never leave it the rest of the way. Totally think that's in the cards for Oregon. That's why he is my Heisman favorite. He was honestly pretty close to winning it last year and then came back to school, which is another massive vote of confidence in his favor. Those are my Heisman 10 from bottom to top. 10 is Sayin, 9's Tony, 8 is Carr, 7 is Jeremiah Smith, 6 is John Mateer, 5 is Josh Hoover, 4 is Darian Mensah, 3 is Trinidad Chambliss, 2 is Archibald Manning, and 1 is Dante Moore. And so that is the Heisman list as we begin the 2026 season, which kicks off in just about 3 weeks. And again, that will be a rolling, updating thing. We'll do it throughout the season with probably just a top 5. All right, let's get into the coaches poll as we see the list here. 25-1 goes Missouri, Houston, Clemson, Iowa, Utah, SMU, Washington, Tennessee, Penn State, Michigan. BYU, Southern Cal, LSU, Texas Tech, Bama, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Miami, Indiana, Notre Dame, Texas, Georgia, Oregon, OSU. All right, so that seems to be pretty much the right-ish list, in my opinion. Now, I'll have some changes when I release my top 25, which will be coming out later this month. And obviously, that'll be posted to the channel and everything, so stay tuned for that. But there's a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of surprising stuff in here as well. But let's talk, first off, Ohio State. Ohio State won the first place votes going away. Every coach mostly seems to trust Ryan Day. Now, the coaches, they're pretty much randomly selected, and after they get randomly selected, they usually use their SIDs to majorly help them out picking teams, especially in preseason when they've been pretty enveloped in transfer portal and off-season recruiting and off-season conditioning. Like, there's a lot that goes into an off-season for the coach, and they're not necessarily paying attention to the rest of the country. In season, they're probably not paying attention to the rest of the country because they have a football team to coach. So often these guys rely majorly on SIDs. And the SIDs have spoken, and they have said Ohio State is far and away the best, which may or may not be true. And then, next up, we have Oregon. Oregon finishes just a few votes above Georgia, but with fewer first-place votes. And the first-place votes do count more, but there's more total points, so total votes, in favor of Oregon. Then it's Georgia. Georgia's probably going to be lower than this in the AP poll, and they're probably going to be lower than this in the Nate State poll. But coaches generally trust Kirby Smart, and it's probably a wise thing to do so. Kirby Smart is, honestly, incredibly gifted as a coach. He is a great motivator. He's really good at scheming up a defense, and he absolutely can lead Georgia to a title this year. 4 is Texas. Texas only got 2 first-place votes, however. And to me, that's notable because I think Texas came in and stole a lot of the players from other teams, and the other coaches didn't like that as much. And so they said, nope, don't like Texas. We see their roster. We recognize how good it is, but we're not going to put them first place. So Texas got a lot of second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth place votes, very few first place votes. Notre Dame barely edged out Indiana by a decimal point, and they get the 5th overall spot. Now, Notre Dame, again, they're going to be right there this season. They have an easy schedule. They have C.J. Carr, running back room still consistently good, defense still good. Notre Dame's just super solid all around. And that's really all they need to be. And really all you need to be is really all you have to be. And all you need to be is all you have to be, and that's what Notre Dame is. And so Notre Dame is going to likely finish top 5, certainly top 12, and be in this playoff. So honestly, the 5 spot from the coaches to me seems like a decently good idea. 6 is Indiana. Now, this is fascinating. So that means 2 things. That means, first of all, Indiana is undervalued. Second of all, Indiana is not loved by the coaches yet. Certainly not respected quite yet. And third, Indiana received 14 first-place votes. Indiana received 14 first-place votes. That's the second most. Yet they're 6th overall, which means they got hammered by some coaches. Some coaches maybe didn't even rank them. And so that's an issue, because Indiana's going to be right there this year. But it also goes to show the trust for Indiana isn't quite there yet, and Cignetti's going to have a lot to prove still going into this year. We'll see what happens there. Miami is 7th overall. The Canes that's probably about fair. Then we got Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas Tech, LSU. Okay, so right there we got 5 out of 6 that are SEC teams. Only 2 are above that, Texas and Georgia. So that's a whole lot at the very back end of the playoff there. That's obviously not sustainable because they're going to beat up on each other a whole lot. So that's curious to me why they have those group right there. Now, it's probably the right place to be, just talent-wise and culture-wise, but that's not going to be sustainable towards the end of the year, and so that's going to get broken up for sure. Obviously, these rankings change. Obviously, probably one of these top 10 teams is going to finish unranked. That's usually how it rolls. But for now, it's quite curious how all those SEC teams are bunched to me, and I don't think that's going to hold consistent throughout this rest of the season. Southern Cal, BYU, Michigan, Penn State. Okay, that's a bunch of Big Ten teams all bunched together. Again, this is not exactly sustainable. They're going to be more spread out. They always are. And, well, honestly, this is probably fairly ranked for most of these. Penn State is right in there, beneficiary of a weaker schedule. Michigan is there, beneficiary of having Kyle Whittingham and having him be quite respected. BYU is probably undervalued. I like Bear Bachmeier quite a bit. I think that defense will be really good. LJ Martin is going to be a fantastic player for them again this year. And so I think BYU has a really good chance of winning the Big 12. Okay, Washington is at the 19th spot. So our 20-25 is SMU, Utah, Iowa, Clemson, Houston, Missouri. That's a pretty good back end. We don't really know what's up with these teams. This is just a best guess. I don't think Iowa's going to be quite that good. I don't think Clemson's going to be quite that good. I could see Houston and Utah being better. I could see SMU being better. I think they've properly pegged Missouri there. And we have some also receiving votes between Virginia and between another ACC school. NC State is in there. Not really anybody from the G5. Boise State received some votes, but not too much there. That is not something that holds consistent for me. I do have a G5 team in my rankings, which again I will release later this month. And so the coaches poll often is just purely based on respect. Who respects who? Well, from what I can see, Ryan Day, pretty well respected. Dan Lanning, pretty well respected. Kirby Smart, definitely respected. Kurt Cignetti, not really. Miami, they still want Miami to get proven. Ole Miss, still want Pete Golden to get proven. Alabama, still want Kalen DeBoer to be proven. This is the first time since 2008 Alabama has been outside the top 10 on the coaches poll. Kyle Whittingham, very well respected. They have respect for Morgan Scalley. Otherwise, Utah wouldn't be ranked at all. Willie Fritz, he is being respected quite a bit as well. So, in this list, we see some respect. We see some disrespect. We see some teams that are likely in there for brand purposes. Looking at you, orange teams in 18 and 23, Tennessee and Clemson. And we have some teams in there that they're a little bit salty at the coaches, Cignetti and Sarkisian. We have some teams in there that are mostly just pure potential, Texas Tech, Ole Miss, Oklahoma. We have some teams in there that proved it a little bit last year, still have a lot to prove, Miami, Texas A&M. And then we have our top 2, Ohio State and Oregon. Both Big Ten schools, I'd like to note, both will play each other in the season in the shoe. I would like to note as well. So that will be certainly an interesting game when we roll around to that portion of the season. Okay, so I released an article earlier this week. You can check it out on my Twitter. At NateStateU is the name on the Twitter account. Hashtag Nate State again here on YouTube. So, here's what we got rolling on in the Big Ten versus SEC battle. So the Big Ten is right now the top of the power structure. They've won the last 3 titles by 3 different teams. And quite frankly, that goes just a massively long way into deciding who is, the best of the teams. The national title usually tells you who the best team is. And it has the last 3 years. It's been a Big Ten school, and now the SEC is playing catch-up. And that's not something the SEC usually plays. They usually are the team that goes out there, that dominates everybody. That's all hoorah, hooray. And then they go out there, they have 1 or 2 teams in the title game, and more often than not, it's felt like they've won it. So, honestly, I assume that if you're watching this, you too care about college sports. And we're about to discuss if it was the Big Ten's fault or the SEC's fault that college sports have gotten where they are. But let's go back to 1984, and the Supreme Court rules that the NCAA has monopolized the ratings. You can't do that, and they're going to split the media rights in a bunch of different ways. And originally it was the College Football Alliance that kept it all together, but they didn't keep it together long. Only about 7 years, and then the conferences took their own rights, split off, and put up their picket lines. SEC, ACC, Big 12, Pac-12, Big 10, whack. Some deals were better than other deals. And those schools that were in the worst deals jumped ship, created realignment. And the realignment stretched through the 90s, kind of cooled off in the 2000s, the early 2000s, and then heated right back up again in the early 2010s with the creation of the Big Ten Network, and then subsequently the ACC Network, and then the SEC Network, and then that first ACC Network folded, and then ESPN picked up an ACC Network and restarted that. The Longhorn Network failed, and then you get the ESPN Plus with the Big 12, and a whole bunch of media deals. The Pac-12 network started. That failed miserably. Kind of led to the Pac-12 getting unstable and eventually collapsing. Now, NIL came through in the middle of this as well. And NIL threw a whole monkey wrench into that because it very quickly separated some of the haves and have-nots. And it did actually level the playing field a little bit, because some of the have-nots that were have-nots in the recruiting era suddenly have a lot of money. And money is quite nice. And that money translates quite well to the game of football and the game of basketball. Notably, Indiana has a lot of money, and they're willing to show it and prove it every single chance they get. Okay, but the Big Ten rolls through. They take USC, they take UCLA, they take Washington, they take Oregon. Never one to miss an opportunity to get some sloppy seconds. Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado roll on to the Big 12, who had just picked some schools up from the G5 as well. Cal and Stanford eventually go to the ACC, which leaves Washington State and Oregon State sitting alone. They eventually do rebuild the Pac-12, but it's no longer a power conference, unfortunately. So now you're left with a Power 4. And those Power 4, if you look at it, pretty apparent that it's a Power 2. And the Power 2 becomes the SEC for the Big Ten. And the Big Ten, right now, currently as it stands, is winning in the battle. Now, potential-wise, going into this year, I have the SEC as the top to bottom better conference. But I understand the reasons why people would disagree with that. The Big Ten has more schools that can quote-unquote win the national championship, although I don't know if that truly means anything right now, because, again, we haven't even had a game been played yet. Like, saying, oh, they can win the national championship, and they can't win the national championship. I mean, how much relevance does that have in August? Because, I mean, a couple years ago, Texas A&M opened the season top 10. Everybody was like, oh, they could win a national title. and then they lost to Appalachian State at home. 2007, same exact story with Michigan. So, you just have these wild upsets happen every year, and we have teams just fall off the map every year, and the wheels come off the bus every year. And every year we're like, oh, right, those preseason rankings in August didn't matter a lick. And so just looking at the standard, we truly can't tell who the best conference is this year between the SEC and the Big Ten. But this is more than just this year. This is previous years as well. And so after the entire sport changes, we needed to take a look. And when we took a look, we needed someone to blame. And the blame immediately gets pointed at the SEC. And the SEC is a conference of loudmouths. Georgia, Bama, LSU, they love to talk. And then the SEC signs this massive deal with ESPN. And sports fans, unlike they used to, don't really love ESPN anymore, certainly not on a day-to-day basis. Now, ESPN does do a good job with college football presentation, much better than it previously has been. Certainly it's gotten better in the last 5 years. But the issue is, well, quite frankly, ESPN is not a fan favorite, and the SEC wasn't either. And so suddenly, it's a compound complex, and it becomes anathema to us all. And SEC fans don't exactly encourage the situation. They love to hit us with SEC propaganda that's not well thought through, and certainly has major statistical issues in it. And honestly, they're just kind of snobbish sometimes, quite frankly. And so that makes them easy to hate. And other things that they've recently done, such as, well, LSU specifically, suggesting private equity and, them threatening to break away and make a super league, it doesn't help either. But let's take a look at the SEC for sometimes, and that's definitely part of it too. But we need to take a look at the positive of the SEC as well. The SEC wants to keep college football on Saturdays, and it wants to make Saturdays feel the most important. And honestly, they do a good job of that. No Friday games. They make the college football games, even a noon kick, special. Even a noon kick between Kentucky and Georgia still feels special. Feels still like a big deal. Even if Kentucky is 2-8 and Georgia is 9-1, it still feels special. And they do a good job on that. And it keeps the magic in the air on a campus too. The magic you feel in a weekend, going into a game, kind of the buzz that you start to feel around campus, around the stadium as you walk up. That's definitely there much more on a Saturday than it is on a Friday night. And so even though Friday night makes some logistical sense, some cash sense, the SEC keeps things on Saturday, and they make it feel special that way. And that's something they do really well. And they do optimize some things for cash, but it feels like they make a lot of good decisions as far as keeping sports special goes. A lot of that cash is through ESPN. That may or may not be the cleanest of cash, but whose cash is clean at this point anyway? Do you think Fox's cash is clean? Do you think NBC's cash is clean? I don't. And so, ESPN has a pretty corporate model, and despite the SEC being part of ESPN, the SEC's done a pretty good job staying away from the corporate model of pump it up as far as high as it can go and then dump it. That's what corporate loves to do, but the SEC hasn't felt that way so far. The SEC also has done a really good job of reinvesting in other sports. SEC volleyball had both teams vie for the national title this past year between Kentucky and Texas A&M. The gymnastics has improved greatly. Women's hoops, obviously, fantastic and noticeable improvement far past just South Carolina. And baseball has, I believe, 7 national titles in a row now, and that's not all been the same program. That's been Oklahoma and Ole Miss and Florida, and LSU. Various different teams have won the title across those 7 years. Like, they've been able to split things up well. They've been able to divvy out that money well. You've seen every single team in that conference at least get a little bit better in something ever since that new ESPN cash came in. So the SEC has done a great job reinvesting and staying away from a corporate model. Now let's take a look at the Big Ten. The Big Ten, it's not quite as good at staying away from the corporate model. They signed with 3 different networks. They have Fox, CBS, and NBC. And, Fox is the biggest partner with that. But the Big Ten plays on Friday nights. The Big Ten plays early on Saturdays. The Big Ten does not do a great job making a lot of their games feel special. I remember Washington going to Oregon last year, or Washington, not Oregon, going to Rutgers last year on a Friday night. Who wants to watch Washington play Rutgers on a Friday night? I just don't think the demand for that is there. The Big Ten is just a massive conference. It's a corporate conference. It's just very large, very empty. It's an entity, not a feeling. There's not a brotherhood there. You got the West Coast schools, and that's different from the Midwest schools, which is different from the East Coast schools. Maryland and USC, do they really feel like a part of the same thing? No, they don't. There's an issue you can talk, but the ACC is that big, but the Big 12's that big. And yeah, Utah and West Virginia don't exactly feel like the same conference either, but at least there's more centralization there than there is with the Big Ten. The Big Ten is a national conference. A national conference is going to sacrifice regionality in and of itself. And sacrificing regionality can make for some bigger games, and we're looking forward to a lot of those bigger games this year. Ohio State playing Oregon and USC. Penn State, I think they play Washington this year. That's not regional whatsoever, but it is a good game. And, there's just not quite the big games that come from the Big Ten are big because numbers say they're big. Because the number on the screen next to the team that humans have artificially imagined next to it, basically, because their record and metrics say what they are. That's why that makes those games big. They are not big because 100 years ago, Jimmy from Georgia decided to walk up and punch a Florida offensive lineman only to get thrown across his entire sideline. They're not big because there's not history there. And that's what makes a lot of the SEC special to me. There's a rivalry between Mississippi State and Alabama. And if you're not in that part of the country, you just don't recognize that because it feels like Alabama rolls them all the time. But Mississippi State fans can't stand Alabama, and Alabama still can't stand Mississippi State even after they beat them year after year after year. And it's just those little things that you just don't know about between SEC fan bases. And Texas and Oklahoma have been just a fantastic addition to the conference. SEC games are big because the people within those states and within those schools and within those organizations make it big. They're not big because it's number 15 versus number 11. They're big because they matter to whole areas of the country. And that's what makes college sports honestly super special. And it's part of the reason why it makes the SEC feel more special on a week-to-week basis to me than the Big Ten. The Big Ten, they're a pump and dump conference. They're going to pump up these schools for all they're worth. We've already seen it with Rutgers and Maryland. They added the D.C. market and added the New York market. And ever since Rutgers and Maryland have joined the Big Ten, they have accomplished exactly nothing. And so, other than Maryland lacrosse, I mean, do we have an example of those schools truly succeeding? I'm not sure it's there. And so, the Big Ten, while it does deliver us amazing games on a week-to-week basis, and certainly is a great college basketball conference as well, they have issues spanning simply just borders. They're going to have a tough time over the long run unless they can continue to increase money, which is why they ask for private equity. They're going to have a tough time keeping that all together because travel budgets are large. Washington left for the Big Ten. Since they did that, their Department of Athletics has been operating at millions of dollars of loss. It's going to be tough if an athletic department can make money, make it, profit somewhere else, not be losing millions of dollars. It's going to be harder to keep them around even if you are the top conference. That's just facts of the matter. So the Big Ten has just got to get more money, more cash infused into it if it's going to keep everybody around. How do you get more cash? There's a couple ways to do it. Private equity is going to be one of them. We don't want the future of the sport to be in private equity. I am certainly concerned the Big 12 is going that way. Another one they want to do is the 2014 playoff. The 2014 playoff is more acceptable, but I like the regular season mattering a ton. I like it when one loss ends your season. I like it when two losses ends your season. The sport has grown in such a way with the new NIL era that that's not exactly the more realistic thing anymore. So an 8-team playoff or a 12-team playoff is probably better. I am fine if we go to 16. I like the 16-team format better anyway. But a 2014 playoff does devalue the regular season. That's honestly just the facts of the matter. And it helps out some of the bigger programs, but 16 is large enough to get some of the smaller programs in there. 16 is plenty of large enough to include pretty much any team that can win a national title without including too many teams that just quite simply can't. And so I think a 16-team playoff is where I would like to go, where the sport should be going, and it's something the SEC would like. It's something the Big Ten would not like. I'm with the SEC in this case. I think the SEC is a little bit more of a rival than a villain. We like to cheer against the SEC as just general college football fans. Unless you're a part of that conference, it's fun to cheer against them. It's fun to chant SEC sarcastically at them. But they're not a true villain unless they too start pushing for private equity. Then they're a true villain. The Big Ten, they in the guise of being a friend of the sport because they're not the SEC, has been able to worm their way into too many things that we dislike. The Big Ten is easily doing just as many things, and in my opinion, more than the SEC that college football should be fighting against. And so the Big is pretending to be a friend, but they're college football's enemy unless they can honestly shape things up differently. The Big Ten will happily throw open doors the SEC won't, at least initially, in chase of the almighty dollar. And they have to do that because their schools are just spending more than other schools are. That's just the nature of how the Big Ten needs to roll. Once the door is open, anyone will slide through the door. And that's just what we see with humans. That's just what we do. We don't want to make the first step when someone else does. Ooh, new shiny object. Everybody must go. I mean, I feel like we've seen that with a lot of this AI boom that we've seen, ChatGPT throws the door open and suddenly we have 16 different AI models, which all keep getting consolidated, and now they want to charge for them all. And everybody's like, ooh, half the people are like, oh, AI is the greatest thing ever. Half the people are like, oh man, we can't stand AI. It's the worst thing that was ever created. We never should have done this. I feel like we could certainly get into that area with college football, with college sports in general. Right now, they feel closer to being helped out and to being, quote-unquote, saved than we have been anywhere in the last 5 years Also, if you like anarchy and you argue for anarchy, I'd like you to read the college football story of the last 5 years and still see if you hold that position. Governing bodies need to exist. Somebody needs to be the biggest man in the room. Doesn't look like it's going to be the SEC. It doesn't look like it's going to be the Big Ten. Both these are the blind leading the blind. But as far as who is worse, who is more evil, who wants the worst for college sports and the best for themselves, right now, I'd have to point that finger at the Big Ten, not the SEC. Now, that doesn't mean we can't root for any SEC schools. This is more about the corporate conference than the member institutions. The member institutions just joined because it was a good deal. Although the financial situation at the schools such as Washington is proving that it may in fact not have been great of a deal as we were originally told. But as far as it goes, fans need to continue to fight against little moves. Now, one fight that doesn't need to happen is uniform patches on sports. That happens basically every sport, period. And I know college football is separate, and I know college football is different, but these patches they're just not going to be a big deal. I mean, they're just going to go right next to the conference patch that was on there anyway, or the uniform patch that was on there anyway. There were already ads on the uniforms. They were just happened to be the apparel logo. And so that brings us to the end of this show and the end of this monologue. The Big Ten should be treated as a sensible threat than the SEC as of right now. This is a very fluid situation. It can change at any moment. When it does, I will be getting on here and talking to you all about that. But for right now, we should be fighting against anything the Big Ten does just as much as we should be fighting against anything the SEC does. They both are not necessarily the best news, but as far as bad news goes, I think the Big Ten would add slightly more in that situation than the SEC would for the moment. All right, that wraps things up on the Nate State Show for this week. Next week, we are going to have some fun with our first taste at a little bit more of the ranking side of things. Take a look at who I think could really actually win the title. And we're going to take a look at every single week of the season and decide what the most impactful game that week will be. And I'll talk to you all next Thursday right here, YouTube, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 Pacific. So,